The void don't talk to most folks, but when it does, you best listen, or you'll find yourself floating cold and silent between the stars with nothing but regret for company. I learned that lesson the hard way, same as I learned most everything else worth knowing. Name's Ezra Kane, and I used to preach the good word to miners and drifters on the outer rim. Used to believe in salvation and second chances, in the power of prayer to move mountains, or in our case, asteroids. That was before Kepler's fall, before I watched a whole colony turn to ash and bone, while I stood helpless, with nothing but scripture and good intentions. Now I carry a different kind of gospel, the kind that speaks in plasma bursts and graviton charges. The job came to me through the usual channels. A coded transmission bounced off 3 relay stations and filtered through enough encryption to make a corporate data thief weep. The client wanted to meet at Sanctuary Station, that ramshackle collection of salvaged hulls and desperate dreams orbiting the dead world of Calvary Prime. I should have known right then that this wasn't going to be a simple escort run. Sanctuary Station smelled like recycled air, burnt coffee, and broken promises. The kind of place where you kept your hand near your weapon and your back to the wall. I found my client in the Rusty Nebula, a bar that had seen better decades, nursing something that might have been whiskey if you squinted and didn't ask too many questions. She was small, maybe 40 standard years, with the kind of weathered face that spoke of too much time under alien suns. Her clothes were expensive but worn, like she'd been running for a while and traveling light. When she looked up at me, her eyes held the particular brand of desperation that made my trigger finger itch. "You Kane?" she asked, her voice carrying a slight tremor that could have been fear or stims. Hard to tell in a place like this. Depends who's asking. I settled into the booth across from her, keeping my coat open so she could see the twin plasma pistols riding my hips. In my experience, honest clients appreciated knowing they were dealing with a professional. Dishonest ones usually revealed themselves pretty quick when faced with visible firepower. "My name's Dr. Sarah Chen. I need safe passage to the Lazarus Moon for myself and my charge." She slid a credit chip across the scarred table. "Half now, half on delivery. No questions asked." I picked up the chip and ran it through my scanner. The number that came back made me whistle low. "That's a lot of coin for a simple escort job, Doc. What aren't you telling me?" Her hands trembled as she reached for her drink. "The child I'm traveling with is special. There are people who would do anything to get their hands on him. Bad people." "What kind of special?" I'd learned the hard way that in this business, special usually meant likely to get you killed in unpleasant ways. Dr. Chen was quiet for a long moment, staring into her glass like it might hold answers to questions she was afraid to ask. He hears things that shouldn't be possible to hear, such as the void. She looked up at me, and I saw fear in her eyes. Real fear, the kind that comes from staring into the abyss and having it stare back. He says it talks to him, and lately it's been talking back. I should have walked away right then, should have pushed that credit chip back across the table and found myself a nice, simple cargo run to somewhere boring and safe. But the truth was, I needed the money. My ship, the Penitent, was held together with prayer and spare parts, and both were running low. Besides, I'd made a career out of taking jobs that other folks were too smart or too scared to touch. When do we leave? The Lazarus Moon hung in space like a hollow skull, its surface scarred by the mining operations that had carved out its heart decades ago. What remained was a shell of rock and metal, honeycombed with tunnels and chambers that now served as home to the kind of people who preferred the company of vacuum to their fellow humans. Dr. Chen had brought the boy to my ship just before departure, and I understood immediately why she was so spooked. The kid couldn't have been more than 10 standard years. Small and pale with dark hair that seemed to absorb light, but it was his eyes that got to you. Ancient eyes in a child's face, like he'd seen things that would break a grown man's mind. "This is Marcus," Dr. Chen said, her hand resting protectively on the boy's shoulder. "Marcus, this is Captain Kane. He's going to take us somewhere safe." The boy looked up at me, and for a moment I felt like I was falling into deep space, tumbling through the void between stars. When he spoke, his voice was soft, but carried an odd resonance, like an echo from somewhere far away. "Hello, Captain Kane. The void says you carry ghosts." I felt ice water run down my spine. "What did you say?" "The void. It knows about the people you couldn't save. It says they follow you, whispering in the spaces between heartbeats." Dr. Chen's face went white. "Marcus, we talked about this. You can't just—" "It's all right, Doc." I knelt down to the boy's level, studying those unsettling eyes. "What else does the void tell you, son?" Marcus tilted his head, listening to something I couldn't hear. "It says there are ships following us. 3 of them, running dark. It says they want to take me somewhere cold and quiet." I was on my feet and moving before he finished speaking, my hands dancing over the Penitent's sensor array. At first, the screens showed nothing but empty space and distant stars. Then I switched to passive thermal imaging and felt my blood turn to liquid nitrogen. 3 ships, just like the boy said, running silent and cold about 2 clicks off our starboard bow. Military configuration, built for speed and violence. The kind of ships that belonged to people who didn't take no for an answer. "Doc, you want to tell me who these friends of yours are?" I was already laying in a course for the Lazarus Moon, pushing the Penitent's engines as hard as I dared. "Corporate security," she whispered. "Hegemony Industries. They've been hunting Marcus ever since." She stopped, glancing at the boy. "Ever since what?" Marcus answered for her, his voice carrying that same eerie resonance. "Ever since I told them what the void showed me, about the thing sleeping in the heart of their research station, the thing that shouldn't be woken up." The first plasma bolt lit up the darkness like an angry star, passing close enough to our hull that I could feel the heat through the bulkheads. The hunters had given up their stealth, and now they were coming hard and fast. "Strap in!" I shouted, throwing the Penitent into a spiraling dive toward the Lazarus Moon's surface. The old ship groaned and shuddered, but she held together. She always did somehow. More plasma fire split the void around us, the corporate ships closing in like wolves on a wounded deer. I'd been in plenty of fights before, but 3-to-1 odds in open space were long enough to make a gambling man nervous. Our only chance was to reach the moon's tunnel system before they could line up a killing shot. "There," Marcus said, pointing at what looked like empty rock. "The void shows me a way in. The old mining shaft, coordinates 127 by 84. I didn't question how a 10-year-old boy could read stellar coordinates, or how he could see passages that didn't show up on any of my scans. Right then, I was willing to trust anyone who might keep us breathing for another few minutes. The entrance Marcus had spotted was barely wide enough for the Penitent. A jagged tear in the moon's surface that looked like it had been carved by some massive claw. I sent us diving through it, just as another volley of plasma fire turned the space we'd occupied into superheated gas. The tunnel beyond was a maze of interconnected passages, carved from living rock by machines that had died before Marcus was born. Emergency lighting flickered along the walls, casting dancing shadows that seemed to move with purpose. The air was thin but breathable, recycled by automated systems that had somehow kept running long after their creators had moved on. I set the Penitent down in a cavern that had once been a processing center, the floor still littered with the rusted remains of ore crushers and refinement equipment. Through the cockpit windows, I could see the 3 corporate ships hovering at the tunnel mouth like vultures, too big to follow us inside, but too determined to give up the hunt. "They'll send in ground teams," Dr. Chen said, her voice tight with fear. "Hegemony doesn't give up easily." "Then we don't give them time to organize." I was already checking my weapons, making sure the plasma pistols were fully charged, and the graviton rifle was primed for action. "How far to wherever we're going?" "The research facility is in the moon's core," she replied. "About 6 kilometers through the main transit tunnel. But Kane, you don't understand what we're walking into. The things they were doing there, the experiments." "The Void says they were trying to listen," Marcus interrupted, his young face grave. "Trying to hear the songs that sing between the stars, but they listened too hard, and something listened back." I felt that familiar chill again, the one that came whenever the boy spoke about his invisible companion. "What kind of something?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, his head tilted like he was listening to a voice only he could hear. When he spoke again, his words carried the weight of prophecy, something old, something hungry, something that's been waiting in the dark between worlds for someone to finally hear its call. The transit tunnel stretched ahead of us, like the throat of some massive beast, its walls lined with bioluminescent strips that provided just enough light to navigate by. Our footsteps echoed in the thin air, a steady rhythm that seemed to match the beating of some vast, hidden heart. I took point, the graviton rifle ready in my hands, while Dr. Chen stayed close to Marcus. The boy walked with the confident stride of someone who knew exactly where he was going, even though he'd never been here before. Every few minutes he would pause and tilt his head, listening to his invisible guide. "Left here," he would say, or "The Void says there's a safer path through the maintenance shaft." Each time his directions proved accurate, leading us around collapsed sections of tunnel or past automated security systems that should have been deactivated decades ago. We'd been walking for about an hour when I heard the first sounds of pursuit, the distant echo of boots on stone, the crackle of military comm units. The corporate teams had found our trail. "How much farther?" I asked, checking the charge on my weapons. "Close now," Marcus replied. "The Void says we're almost to the heart of things." As if summoned by his words, the tunnel opened into a vast chamber, carved from the living rock of the moon's core. Emergency lighting cast everything in shades of red and shadow, revealing banks of sophisticated equipment that hummed with barely contained energy. At the center of it all stood a structure that made my eyes water to look at directly. a crystalline lattice that seemed to exist in more dimensions than the human mind could properly process. "Dear God," Dr. Chen whispered. "They actually built it." "Built what?" I kept my rifle trained on the tunnel entrance, expecting corporate soldiers to come pouring through at any moment. A void resonance array, a machine designed to amplify psychic signals across interstellar distances. They were trying to make contact with something on the far side of the galaxy. Marcus walked toward the crystalline structure, his movements dreamlike and purposeful. "It worked," he said softly. "They made contact, but the thing they found wasn't what they expected." The boy reached out and placed his small hand on the nearest crystal face. Immediately, the entire array began to pulse with eldritch light, and a sound filled the chamber. Not quite music, not quite screaming, but something that bypassed the ears entirely and resonated in the bones. "Marcus, get away from that thing!" Dr. Chen started forward, but I caught her arm. "Wait," I said, because something in the boy's posture told me this was important. This was why we were here. The sound grew louder, more complex, and suddenly I could hear it too, not with my ears, but with some deeper sense I didn't know I possessed. It was the voice of the void, vast and alien and utterly inhuman, and it was angry. "It's been trapped," Marcus said, his voice barely audible over the psychic din. "Caught between the spaces, held by the machine's resonance. It wants to go home, but the signal keeps pulling it back." "What is it?" I had to shout to be heard. "Lonely," the boy replied. "So very lonely. It's been calling across the dark for eons, hoping someone would answer. When the machine responded, it thought it had found friends, but all they wanted was to study it, to cage it, to use it. The corporate soldiers chose that moment to make their entrance, plasma rifles blazing. I returned fire, the graviton bursts tearing chunks from the tunnel walls, but there were too many of them. We were pinned down behind a bank of computer terminals, while energy bolts turned the air around us into superheated plasma. "Give us the boy!" The voice carried a corporate accent, all smooth professionalism and implied threats. "Dr. Chen, you know you can't run forever. Hegemony Industries has invested too much in this project to let it walk away." "The project is a child," she shouted back. "A human being, not some laboratory specimen. The boy is the key to unlocking communication with an alien intelligence. Do you have any idea what that's worth? What it could mean for humanity's expansion into the galaxy?" I fired another burst, forcing the soldiers to take cover. "What it means," I called out, "is you're playing with forces you don't understand. Some doors are meant to stay closed." Marcus was still standing by the crystalline array, his hand pressed against its surface, seemingly oblivious to the firefight raging around him. The alien song was growing stronger, more insistent, and I could feel it tugging at the edges of my consciousness, like a tide pulling at the shore. "It wants to show me something," the boy said, his voice carrying clearly despite the chaos. "The void wants me to see what really happened here." The world around us flickered, and suddenly I was somewhere else, or someone else. The chamber was the same, but now it was filled with scientists and technicians, all working frantically at their instruments. At the center of it all, the crystalline array pulsed with that same eldritch light, but the resonance was different somehow. Hungrier. I watched in horror as the researchers began to change, their movements becoming jerky and unnatural. Their eyes rolled back, showing only white, and when they spoke, It was in unison, their voices carrying that same alien resonance I'd heard from Marcus. "We hear you," they chanted. "We welcome you. We offer ourselves as vessels for your glory." But the thing in the void didn't want vessels. It wanted freedom. As the scientists collapsed one by one, drained of life and sanity, the alien presence grew stronger, more real. It began to push through the dimensional barriers the machine had created, seeking escape from its crystalline prison. The vision ended abruptly, leaving me gasping and disoriented. The firefight was still raging, but now I understood what we were really dealing with. The machine wasn't just a communication device. It was a trap, designed to lure alien intelligences close enough to capture and study. And something had been caught in its web for decades, growing more desperate and angry with each passing year. "We have to shut it down," I told Dr. Chen. "The machine, it's torturing that thing." "I know," she replied, tears streaming down her face. "That's why I took Marcus and ran. When I realized what hegemony was really doing, what they planned to do to him. They wanted to use him as a permanent interface," Marcus said, his voice distant and dreamy. "To make me part of the machine, so they could control what comes through. But the void doesn't want to be controlled. It just wants to go home." Another volley of plasma fire forced us deeper into cover. The corporate soldiers were advancing, and it was only a matter of time before they flanked our position. I had maybe 2 minutes of charge left in my weapons, and then we'd be at their mercy. That's when Marcus made his choice. The boy stepped away from the crystalline array and walked into the open, directly into the line of fire. The soldiers hesitated, unwilling to risk harming their prize. And in that moment of uncertainty, Marcus spoke. But it wasn't his voice that filled the chamber. It was the voice of the void itself, vast and alien and utterly implacable. The words bypassed language entirely, speaking directly to the primitive parts of the human brain that still remembered what it meant to be prey. "Enough!" The corporate soldiers dropped their weapons, clutching their heads in agony. Some fell to their knees, others collapsed entirely, overwhelmed by contact with an intelligence so alien that their minds simply couldn't process it. Even I felt the edges of my sanity beginning to fray, and I had to close my eyes and focus on breathing to keep from joining them on the floor. Marcus walked to the crystalline array's control console, his small hands moving with impossible precision across instruments designed for adult researchers. "I can free it," he said, his own voice returning. "But the machine will be destroyed in the process. The whole facility might collapse." "Do it," I said without hesitation. Some prisons were meant to be broken. Dr. Chen nodded agreement, her face pale but determined. "Free them both. You and the thing in the void. You've both been trapped long enough." Marcus smiled then, the first truly childlike expression I'd seen from him. His fingers danced across the controls, and the crystalline array began to pulse faster, brighter. The alien song rose to a crescendo that seemed to shake the very foundations of reality. And then, with a sound like the universe taking a deep breath, it was over. The array went dark and silent. The oppressive weight of the alien presence lifted from the chamber like a fever breaking. In the sudden quiet, I could hear the corporate soldiers groaning as they slowly regained consciousness, their minds no longer under assault by forces beyond human comprehension. Marcus swayed on his feet, and Dr. Chen caught him before he could fall. When he looked up at us, his eyes were different, still ancient, still wise, but no longer haunted by that otherworldly resonance. "It's gone," he said softly. "Back to the deep dark where it belongs." And the voice... He paused, listening to something only he could hear. "The voice is quiet now. Just an echo. Like a song you remember from a dream." The corporate soldiers were struggling to their feet, but the fight had gone out of them. Their leader, a hard-faced woman with corporate insignia on her armor, looked at us with something that might have been respect. "The project is finished," she said, her voice hoarse. "Whatever that boy was connected to, it's gone now. Hegemony will write this off as a loss and move on to the next opportunity." "And Marcus?" Dr. Chen asked. The woman shrugged. "A psychic child with no active abilities, not worth the expense of continued pursuit." She gestured to her team. "We're leaving. I suggest you do the same before the moon's structural integrity fails completely." As if summoned by her words, a low rumble shook the chamber. Dust and debris began to fall from the ceiling, and the emergency lighting flickered ominously. The destruction of the array had destabilized something fundamental in the moon's core, and the whole structure was beginning to collapse. We ran. The journey back to the Penitent was a nightmare of falling rock and failing life support systems. Twice we had to detour around collapsed sections of tunnel, and once we barely outran a cascade of debris that would have crushed us all. But Marcus's connection to the void, though weakened, still provided just enough guidance to see us through. My ship was waiting where I'd left her, battered, but intact. As we lifted off from the dying moon, I watched through the rear cameras as the Lazarus collapsed in on itself, centuries of mining finally taking their toll. The corporate ships were already gone, their crews no doubt eager to put as much distance as possible between themselves and this place of broken dreams and alien nightmares. "Where to now?" I asked as we cleared the moon's gravity well. Dr. Chen looked at Marcus, who was curled up in the co-pilot seat, looking for the first time like the child he actually was. "Somewhere quiet," she said. "Somewhere he can just be a boy for a while." "I know a place," I said, thinking of a small agricultural world on the rim where questions weren't asked and children could run free under open skies. Good schools, friendly people, the kind of place where a kid can grow up normal. "Normal," Marcus repeated, tasting the word like it was something exotic and wonderful. "I'd like that." As the Penitent jumped to hyperspace, carrying us away from the Lazarus Moon and toward whatever future awaited us, I found myself thinking about second chances and the strange ways the universe had of balancing its books. I'd started this job as a simple escort run, but somewhere along the way, it had become something more. A chance to save not just a child, but an alien intelligence trapped between worlds, and maybe even a piece of my own soul in the process. The void was quiet now, its ancient song faded to a whisper. But in that silence, I heard something I hadn't heard in years, the sound of hope, fragile and precious as a newborn star. And for the first time since Kepler's fall, I thought I might just be ready to believe in salvation again.